Good morning, all. You're watching the Channel M Breakfast Show on Tuesday, the 20th of January. I'm Byron Evans.
And I'm Polly Winder.
And it is a momentous day with regards to world history. Why, Paul?
Why? Because today is the day that Barack Obama has his inauguration in Washington. Millions of people are going to descend on Washington. Billions are going to be watching it around the world.
Yeah, he is probably the most photographed man in the world at the moment, dominating lots of the newspapers, radio, television. You'd be excused for thinking that Barack Obama was going to pitch up camp at number 10 Downing Street, but he is, in fact, the Americans' president. Unfortunately, we can't have him. But no doubt his influence, his responsibilities will stretch across the globe, and well, people have been talking about change. It looks as though it's coming.
Absolutely. I mean, when you become the president of America, you actually become, in effect, the most powerful man or woman in the world, but in this case, of course, it's the man. And because he's the first black president as well, you know, it's just such a huge story. And he's a celebrity now because, you know, that's the way the world's turning. It's the nature of celebrity. Kids are interested in him. There's people in Washington selling merchandise, diamante-studded hats saying Obama. Yes. You know, you wouldn't get that possibly in England, would you? Brown.
Before, a little bit earlier, Georgia and I were having a conversation with the Dean of Manchester, and we were chatting about the influence of Barack Obama. People have been going over his CV, looking at his personal record, looking at all these sorts of things regards to what makes him the president. I found some very, very interesting bits of trivia, which I think make him perfectly suited for the job.
Byron Evans trivia. Go on, then. Hit me.
He's left-handed.
Like us?
Yeah.
Left-handed, wow. And I knew I had something in common with Barack Obama.
You did. And he collects Superman and Conan comics.
Right, that's cool.
Perfect. Perfect. Makes him perfect. Let's move on.
Yes, OK, then. In a few minutes, we're going to have the latest sport headlines, plus your business news with Kevin Feddy, Deputy Business Editor of the Manchester Evening News. But first, today's top stories with Georgia.
Good morning. Two of Greater Manchester's most senior police officers were caught up in an attempted armed robbery at a McDonald's in Eccles. Assistant Chief Constable Dave Thompson and Chief Superintendent Jeanette McCormick, who are in charge of the Trafford division, confronted a pair of masked men whilst they were trying to kick in a lockjaw behind the counter of the restaurant. The two men were armed with a machete and a knife, but Mr. Thompson challenged them by shouting "Oi!" and Miss McCormick dialed 999. Although both officers were off duty at the time, they managed to foil the robbery and the pair escaped empty-handed. Millions of people will gather in Washington, D.C. to see Barack Obama get sworn in later as the first black president of the United States of America. The ceremony takes place late afternoon our time and will be televised across the world. We've been speaking to some Americans here in Greater Manchester who'll be watching with interest.
Something had to be done. There was no way we could continue on the path we had. We cut our ties and allies with everyone else in the world. We had lost our global standing of decency. Obama was a sensible candidate. I like the message he's brought, the inspiration, hope, change, all these things. Like, definitely need to have a radical departure from the last 8 years. And I think he can offer that.
The big thing is people are looking for something different and something new, and it's kind of this is a way that a lot of people have been able to get inspired by, hoping that whatever happens will be different and that we can move forward from here.
A Manchester man has been ordered to leave Canada after he was left disabled by a work injury. After a number of legal appeals by Chris Mason, a judge upheld the deportation order and he's now on a plane to Manchester. The case has sparked a national debate on Canada's treatment of migrant workers. Mr. Mason, whose family comes from Wythenshawe, has been living in Canada for 8 years, but lost the use of both legs after he was hit by a taxi in 2003. He was ordered out of the country when his work permit expired, and he explained that he was no longer able to work as a lorry driver because of his disability. Immigration officials say he's an undue burden on the economy and have refused him permanent resident status. He's due to return to the UK later today. 3 people have been arrested by police after a 25-year-old man died in a fall from a block of flats in Oldham. Police were called to Flora Street early Saturday morning and an investigation was launched into the man's death. 2 women aged 44 and 33 and a 37-year-old man have been arrested on suspicion of murder and are due to be questioned by Greater Manchester Police. 3 police officers who visited a home in Gatley and left 40 minutes before a woman was bludgeoned to death at the address have been cleared of misconduct. 44-year-old Patricia Smales, who worked on an airline check-in desk at Manchester Airport, was attacked early on Friday morning. Her body was found lying in her front garden at her home in Cromwell Avenue. Police had visited the property just over an hour earlier with an ambulance crew, following concerns about the welfare of a man at the address. Now, despite the rise of the megamarts, shops which champion the personal touch can still be found on the high street if you look for them. Kevin Duffy's been to visit one whose owner's got a lot of history behind him.
Over at Yaffe's household store, they've more reason to celebrate than most. Certainly, they're riding out the credit crunch which is hitting all retailers. But in addition, Jack, the man who started the shop 75 years ago, has just celebrated his 100th birthday. And Jack says the key to success in business is the personal touch and customer service.
We're here to sell what people want. A woman comes in for the kettle, the type of kettle she needs, we go out and get it. Or Evelyn does.
Evelyn, of course, being Jack's daughter-in-law who helps him keep an eye on the business.
We're not worried about the big boys. They come to us for something that they want. And they get it.
If you're lucky enough to have one of these general hardware stores in your community, you'll know that they're so good because they seem to have everything, don't they? Whether it's electrical ware or cookware or household goods, or if you want some drawing pins, they've got them. Toys, there's a tennis ball. And how about these? How sure are you that your local mega-hyper supermarket would have these dolly pegs? Although Jack Yaffe's 75-year-old Prestwich store is riding the economic downturn, the great irony is that some of Jack's important suppliers have fallen victim to the credit crunch.
It is affecting us, there's no doubt about it. We can't get the goods we want.
Happily for Jack, customers definitely do want the goods he can get his hands on, which means Yaffe's looks well on the way to celebrating its 100th birthday 25 years from now. Kevin Duffy for Channel M News.
Thanks, Kevin. A footballer from Whitefield who's suing Premier League player Joey Barton for allegedly ruining his career has been given a 3-month suspended jail sentence for motoring offences. Magistrates heard that Jamie Tandy was battling problems with alcohol when he attempted to kill himself by crashing his car into a lamppost. Tandy was also banned from driving for 3 years after admitting 2 counts of drink driving and driving whilst disqualified. In a separate case, Tandy is claiming that Joey Barton stubbed out a cigar in his face at a Christmas party 4 years ago when they both played for Manchester City. No police action was taken at the time, but Tandy, who now plays for Droylsden, is pursuing a civil claim for damages. Kaká is staying at Milan. Manchester City had a reported £100 million bid in for the player, but last night admitted defeat when the Brazilian turned down the world record deal. A less spectacular but a very respectable £14 million changed hands in City's signing of Craig Bellamy. He's agreed a 4.5-year contract and will link up with his new teammates for a mid-season break in Tenerife. Bellamy's debut will be against Newcastle a week tomorrow. That's all from me on today's Breakfast Show. Join me live at 12 for the latest news from around Greater Manchester. Now over to Will for the sport.
Cheers, Georgia. And as the lady just mentioned, it looks as though the Kaká deal is off. £100 million just doesn't seem to be enough to sign the AC Milan ace to Eastlands, Will.
Do you know what? I love the sun. They come up with the best stuff, don't they? Look at that. Stabbed in the cack.
Oh, dear. There's plenty...
Absolutely brilliant. You can see Robinho there, stabbed in the cack. Apparently not going to City, of course, turn that down. Robinho, that's another big story here. You can see, we showed it earlier, a little earlier on. Robinho storm, training around May Spark exit and derail Kaká bid. Now, that obviously will be more worrying for City fans, of course, not Kaká not coming, but Robinho apparently missing training. We said a break in the news. It's more of a training break for Robinho and for all the City players. He's apparently walked out of a training session yesterday. They couldn't get hold of him, wondering where he was, but... So, I think that's a story out of nothing, really. But there's so many stories in the papers about City, players that could be coming that might not be coming. Andrei Olshavin, remember, in the UEFA Cup final, of course, last year, Zenit St Petersburg against Rangers, scored fantastic goal. He's been linked with everyone. He's, of course, close to joining Tottenham. Arsenal were after him, and he's apparently close to joining City, although Dick Advocate, the manager at Zenit St Petersburg, says he could be on his way to Arsenal. That's closer. Shay Given, fantastic goalkeeper, in my opinion, best goalkeeper in the Premier
League.
League.
But in the papers a lot recently, transfer speculation.
So consistent. If they're going to spend 14 million on Craig Bellamy, only 10 million quid would get him. With Newcastle's sort of financial situation, a couple of the papers, the Daily Star and the Sun, are both saying that Shay Given is close to joining City. On the way out, some of these people have got to leave, obviously, because there's so many coming into City. Nedum Onuoha, who came through the academy with Manchester City, has been fantastic for them, and he, started it on the weekend. He's apparently, Birmingham have reportedly made an inquiry about him. So he could be on the way there. United, of course, in action tonight in the Carling Cup semi-final against Derby. Another youngster that's due to set to play their youngsters this evening. Another youngster could be on his way there, 16-year-old Wen Moyo from Sochaux. So the Daily Mail saying he could be on his way. Rugby Union, Haskell, we mentioned before, could be on his way. Lots of players back who've been out for 4 or 5 months against Claremont on the weekend. And Andy Murray through to the second round. Played a 34-year-old who had to retire from tennis completely.
You said, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, he actually just packed it in a game. It's got nothing to do with the overwhelming muscles of Mr. Murray either.
I thought it must have been that.
Will, as always, thanks very much for joining us. You're back again tomorrow.
Back tomorrow, yeah.
More sport on tomorrow's Channel M Breakfast Show. We'll leave you now with Stockport County manager Jim Gannon and his thoughts on the Kaka move to Eastlands, which we now know probably isn't going to happen. But what does Jim think?
Again, this has been coming for quite a while, hasn't it, in terms of football? My biggest concern is that clubs like ourselves, who are developing fantastic young players, are running out of money because they're not getting enough from the TV, and then yet the top clubs are getting £50 million a year. The game is not balanced. I don't think it's great for the game, the imbalance in the financial payout from the TV. But I understand business. It's a capital business, and the money's at the top. Whether it's good for the game, I don't know. I just hope that the people at Man City at least consider one thing, is reducing the price for their fans, and that would be a great gesture during this difficult time, because I don't want Man City fans not to be able to go to watch them when they start doubling the prices like other clubs have, when they get the quality players and they start charging the fans for that.
Time for a look at today's top business stories, and joining us this morning is Kevin Feddy, Deputy Business Editor for the Manchester Evening News, and John Wilson, the Head of Business at Salford Business School at the university. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I should call you Professor John Wilson, actually. But if we may, I'd like to start with you, Kevin. Let's start locally as well, because, inflation figures are expected this morning.
The inflation figures are expected out later today, Baron, you're quite right. Now, there were 4.1% the inflation rate in November, and we're expecting it to be down to around 2.6%. That's quite a steep fall. That's because of the VAT reduction, which we're seeing discounting on consumer goods, and also the heavy discounting on the high street in the run-up to Christmas. Heavy sales, 70% off at some stores. That's been a major contributor to this fall in the inflation rate. Now, it's sliding towards the 2% government target, which could lead to some concerns that it may slip below that and end up in a period of deflation, which wouldn't be any good.
Yeah, what would deflation mean?
Deflation would mean basically prices are going up slowly and it will sort of contract the economy in certain respects.
So have these figures had any implications on people like, because we mentioned during the outbreak, Wetherspoons?
Yeah, well, talking of deflation, Wetherspoons, the pub chain, of course, many pubs around Greater Manchester and nationally, they've cut their price of the pint of beer, excuse me, to 99p in the last couple of weeks, and their sales are rocketing ahead. They're up 6.4% in the last 2 weeks.
Surprisingly enough.
Getting people out of their homes into the pubs for 99p a pint.
But great news locally. We were talking about this a little bit earlier on the Breakfast Show. 350 new jobs may be coming to Manchester because of the success of a bookies.
Yeah, Betfred, based in Warrington, of course, shops all over the region and nationally. Fred Doan, who runs it, was talking to us, and he was outlining plans for a major expansion, around 40 new shops this year, creating 350 jobs, investment of around £7 million, and that's expanding the bookie shops chain. They have expanded at a faster rate in previous years. It's slowing slightly, but still growth.
OK, thanks, Kevin. John, I may speak to you now, sir, only because a lot of newspapers dominated with the stories about the Royal Bank of Scotland, another bank bailout. Can they be saved?
Well, at the moment, we don't know. I think there's one thing we do know, that unless the government intervenes, no one else will. This, of course, is the second major intervention by the government, the first one being 3 months ago. To some extent, that first intervention did work. It did at least prevent certain banks from collapsing. I think it did inject some confidence into the system. But the second intervention is now to try to give more momentum to the economy, to get the banks lending again to each other and to the businesses. Whether it will work or not remains to be seen.
Is the nationalisation of the banks inevitable now?
No, I certainly don't think it's inevitable, partly for political reasons. The Labour government would be very reluctant, really, to be seen to be taking into public ownership on an extensive scale the banks. They have, of course, increased the share in certain banks, but I think they would be very reluctant politically to go much further. But who knows, they may have to.
OK, well, let's just turn our attention to international affairs. It's a momentous day today. Barack Obama is going to be signed in as the 44th President of the United States of America. His first day in the job. He's got an unfinished war in Iraq. He's got an unfinished war in Afghanistan, troubles in the Middle East. And, oh, yeah, his country may be on the cusp of a depression. Well, let's talk about that global economy and the effect that America has had on the world. What a big job has he got? What a big job he's got in front of him now.
Well, he has. I mean, I think in many respects it's the biggest job of any American president, probably since Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. It is a huge job, dominating it, certainly, notwithstanding the importance of foreign policy issues, notably in the Middle East, but dominating his priorities right now is the economy. Clinton, of course, famously came to power with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," pointing out that nothing else mattered. Well, that's even more true for Obama. There is no question his overwhelming priority is the domestic economy of the United States, which, of course, has a knock-on effect on the rest of the world.
I know they say the old expression goes, the proof will be in the pudding, but do you think he's the right man for the job to help sort of take the global economy by its bootstraps and lift it out of this recession?
Well, again, a number of your guests this morning have commented on the expectations, of course, of Obama, but those expectations in part reflect the huge groundswell of support for him. I think the scale of his victory in all key constituencies, if you like, in America was very, very significant, and it will take some time, I think, for the Republicans to come to terms with that. Bush, of course, his approval ratings are as low now, I think, if not lower than Nixon's were at the lowest point. So I don't think there's any question Obama is the best person right now for the job. Whether he will rise to the demands of the job, again, time will tell. But, of course, we all hope he will, and I think the signs are looking promising.
Well, Professor John Wilson, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And Kevin Ferry, as always, good to see you. See you again next week, sir.
Thank you very much.
OK, time now for a break. Coming next, some energising yoga to help kickstart your morning. Back shortly.